you up front on Shaw TV in partnership with the Saskatoon StarPhoenix. I'm Simon Hyatt. It is incredibly difficult for anyone to make it in the world of elite athletics, but for members of the Indigenous community, the obstacles to achieving high-level success are even greater. On today's show, we'll meet a pair of athletes who have overcome the odds to star under the brightest of lights. But first, I'm happy to welcome my friend Kevin Mitchell to the show. Kevin is, of course, the sports editor at the Saskatoon StarPhoenix. Kevin, thank you for being with us today and for helping setting this all up.
Thanks for having me and for having us here today.
Absolutely. This is an issue that, like so many of the things that you've written so excellently about over the years, it goes well beyond the world of sports, obviously. Talk just a little bit in general terms, the ways in which you've covered the Indigenous athletic community and why you think it's important to shine a spotlight like this.
Well, I think it's very important. And this whole project just kind of started with one simple question, which was, are there barriers to First Nations youth getting involved in sports? And so I started making phone calls and talking to people. Michael was one of the first people I talked to, and I quickly learned that that it's not so much at the youth level. There's a lot of First Nations youth playing sports. There's a lot of supports in place, and there's a lot of them out there playing. The problem comes in when it's time to make the break up into elite level sports, and that's when the barriers really start to show themselves. There's a whole wide range of reasons. And one of the people that Michael suggested I should talk to was Craig, and he said he's got a story to tell. And I ended up talking to Craig on a couple of different occasions for very long periods of time and got this fantastic story about how he faced a lot of the same barriers that so many other First Nations kids faced, and he was able to kind of jump over these barriers one by one, and he was kind of emblematic, I think, of what a lot of kids face. And in his case, he was able to overcome it, play in the Western Hockey League, and play at the university level with the Huskies. Mm-hmm. And he's done so many great things. And we have Michael here, who's played basketball with the Huskies, and he's one of the top 3-on-3 basketball players in the world. And you can see what he's been able to do with his athletic gifts. And there's so many gifted kids out there who don't get a chance to take it to those stages. And I think that's why guys like this are so important, because they can show what can be done. We have the Thompson brothers with the Rush lacrosse team, who I think have influenced a lot of kids. And I think getting those kind of role models out there is so important. And these guys have done such a great job of that.
That's a great place to start with, Kevin. Thank you for that. Let's meet these guys a little bit more on the in-depth side. As Kevin alluded to, we have Michael Linklater and Craig McCallum. Craig, high-level hockey player. Talk a little bit about your origin story, though, if you don't mind, where you grew up and how you first came to love the sport of hockey.
Well, I grew up in Kinner Lake First Nation. When I first started, one of my first experiences with hockey was watching my community members play at a tournament, and just seeing the passion and the excitement and the enjoyment that my fellow community members, my family, was getting out of watching them. I wanted to give that to my family. I wanted to give them those smiles and those reasons to feel happy, and so I decided that I wanted to play hockey. For a long time, it took me a lot of convincing for my mom to actually let me play, because I was a smaller kid. She was scared of me getting hurt, so I didn't actually start playing until I was about 9. That first year was pretty bad. I wasn't as skilled as a lot of the other kids, but I loved the game probably more than any of them. One of my earliest memories of that was my parents always used to question me, and as soon as I'd step on the ice, I'd fall down, and at least that's what they thought I did. And what I'd do is I'd lay down and I'd try and get close to the ice so I could smell it, just because I loved hockey. I loved everything about the game, the smell of the ice, being in the rink, the friendships you make in the dressing room, just everything about it. I loved everything about it. And so it started there, and it didn't really take off for me until I got home. My family moved back after that first year to Kinner Lake, and playing with my friends and my family, that's when hockey really started to take off for me. I was fortunate enough to be in a community that supported that at the time, and I was able to be at the rink whenever I wanted. As soon as school was over, I'd go to the rink. I'd skate from 4:30 till 10:30 when the rink closed, and I'd skate with the novice, the Adams, the Pee-wees, the Bantams, the midgets, the adults, and so I got to develop a lot, and that benefited me hugely. But from there, I went on to play minor hockey in Meadow Lake, which was a struggle for my family and myself because it was an hour and a half away. And in order to play organized sport, you had to travel. So it was a huge toll on my family. But in order for me to get to where I wanted to be, that was something they needed to do and a sacrifice they needed to make. So from there, I went on to play midget AAA in North Battleford. Not the best years of my life, but a good learning experience, I think. And then I went on to play in Beardies. From there, I went to Edmonton and played with the Oil Kings for 2 years. Got traded to Prince Albert. After my WHL career was over, I decided it was time to get an education, and one of the best ways to do that was to use hockey as a catalyst to help me do that. And so I went and played with the Huskies and got an education. And when I was done there, I went and played pro overseas in Europe for a little bit and got to experience the world. And so I've been really fortunate. Hockey has allowed me to do and see a lot of really cool things and do things that a kid from northern Saskatchewan up in the bush might not have thought possible at some point. And actually, like when I was younger, I didn't think that would be possible, but it was a dream for sure. So.
That's fantastic. I love what you said there about getting down close to the ice and loving the smell and the sounds of that. I think anyone who's a sports fan who grew up playing sports, for me it was baseball, just those things that are associated with it. That's fantastic. And you know, it's interesting you say you didn't really start playing hockey until you were 9. For Michael, you didn't really start playing basketball until, what, you were 12 or something?
Yeah.
Can you talk a little bit about your background, how you discovered this sport? And once you did, was it sort of a similar thing? Did you just love everything about it?
Yeah, so I went to St. Mary's Community School, which is in the inner city of Saskatoon. And what happened was we had a fresh court that was actually paved and built in our schoolyard. And I remember when it was being built, me kind of carving my name into the cement while it was still drying. And I named it my court just by chance. But yeah, it was really similar to the same story as Craig, where I came out one recess and this court was ready to be utilized, and a lot of the older students were playing, and I came out and had never played before, and I was just one of the crowd members and watched this game go on, and it created its own environment and atmosphere that that was something that I realized that I wanted to be a part of. And I said, I think this is something that I wanted to do, because some of the older kids were doing some pretty cool things, like in terms of the way they were handling the ball. And so I picked up the ball and I never put it down. Moving forward and practicing with some of these older guys and wanting to be better, I spent so much time in those outdoor courts, just like how he had access to the rink in his community, an outdoor basketball court at really no cost. So me getting one of those back in the day, for any of our viewers that might remember those old KFC Shack basketballs with his hand on there, that was something that I had. And if you bought a meal from there, you got this free basketball. So that was something that I was able to utilize. And I remember trying out for my first team and ended up getting cut. So a lot of my friends made the team. So again, yeah, it wasn't necessarily the greatest experience where I was instantly good at it. It took quite a bit of work. And me realizing that I wanted to make that team the following year. So even just chatting with the coach and asking what I could do to make myself better. And I remember that moment because he gave me a basketball out of his own car, and he said, here, use this to help your shot, and kind of gave me some pointers. And following year, I ended up making that team and just kind of went with it from there. Set some goals for myself at a young age to, one, play in the States, play university here, as well as play professional, and 2, to play for Team Canada. So those are some goals I set for myself at a young age, and something that I realized that a lot of my friends, they started getting, I don't want to say worse, but their skill wasn't developing as quickly as mine. And I realized that it was a lot of the social issues that a lot of my friends were dealing with in the community, with addictions and gangs, the violence, stuff that's just very prevalent in that community. And my friends really struggled with that. So for me to continue to work on my game and realizing that if I was going to go down this road of drugs and alcohol that a lot of my family had even gone down, I knew that it wasn't going to take me where I wanted. So even at a young age to make a decision as one of my goals to abstain from drugs and alcohol was something I realized at a very young age. So that's served me well. I've not experimented with any type of drug or tasted alcohol, and for those reasons. And as we get into more deeper social issues with our people, Indigenous people, we've struggled with alcohol since the day it's come to this continent. So for me to just wanting to make that decision has really helped me. After that, I went on to high school at Mount Royal, had a successful 4 years there. And then I went down to the States for a year, and then bounced around to a few other places after the U of S, and finished my last year with the U of S. And for some people who don't know, we ended up winning the national championship. And after that, went and played a year in the International Basketball League, and for the past 6 years been on the World Tour for 3-on-3 basketball. And just this past year, it's been named an Olympic sport for 2020, and we were named the national team, so we'll be headed to the Philippines for the World Cup next month.
That's fantastic. We'll talk more about that a little bit later on in the show as well. We do want to get a bit more into the issues that are faced by the Indigenous community, but just looking back on that Husky career, because I do want to talk about that a little bit. I was lucky enough to do the play-by-play for a lot of those games at the tail end of your career for their internet broadcasts, and man, oh man, you brought home the first title in the history of that program. Looking back 9 years ago, what do you remember about that?
One of the biggest things of that season was, for me personally, was at the beginning knowing that it was my last year to be playing as a university student athlete. And I made sure for me to make sure that I enjoyed every single moment, every practice. I made sure that I was in the ice baths after that, and just really enjoying the time with the guys. But overall that season, the family that we created amongst each other as players was something that really stood out. Our practices as we got into playoffs were vicious. Like they were it was a little bit scary, but it was all for our own benefit, and how well of conditioned we were was something that really helped us to propel, and each and every one of us accepting our roles. And after winning the national championship, truly understanding what it takes to win was something that I was able to take from that, because you know how to win a game, but to actually win a championship is something completely different.
Outstanding. A lot of ground, obviously, we still want to cover on this episode of Upfront. We're going to take a quick break. We'll be right back. Welcome back to Upfront, joined once again by Craig, Michael, and Kevin, talking about Indigenous athletes and the obstacles they face as they participate in sports. Craig, we're going to come back to you now with something we talked about in the first segment of the show, the obstacles that are presented with the nature of addictions. And this is something that you have talked about, something that you personally have experienced. Do you mind just explaining a little bit about why you felt it was important for you to be open and honest about that, and sharing your story and some of the things you went through, particularly in the excellent article that Kevin wrote?
Well, for me, growing up on reserve and in the environment I did, there was a point in my life where I didn't really know anybody that didn't drink or do drugs or do both. It was kind of it was a situation where I assumed, and I remember thinking it too, like, maybe when I'm 15, I'll be able to do drugs just like everybody else. Or maybe when I'm 16, I'll be able to drink just like everybody else. Like, that was my mindset. I didn't know that it was a choice. I didn't know that you didn't have to do it because everyone around me did it. They drank, or they did drugs, or they did both, and that was just normal. That's just the way it was. And me growing up in that environment, like I said, I just assumed that at one point in my life I would do that too. I was 12 years old when I thought that, and sure enough, when I got older, I started experimenting with Yeah, and then had the night that I did. I went through some of the experiences I went through, and I look back and I don't regret anything I did, because a lot of that led me to this point in my life and helped me get to where I am now. So, but I look back at my life and the way that I grew up, and the reason I go out and share my story as much as I can is because I don't want kids to grow up the way that I did. I don't want them to not know anybody that doesn't drink or do drugs. I want them to know that it's a choice. I want them to know that they don't have to learn the hard way like too many people in our lives have. Like I'm sure it's the same with Michael, but you know, I've lost track of the number of people I've lost in my life due to drugs or alcohol or both. And it's hard on a community and it's hard on a person, and growing up in that environment, I just want kids to have something positive to look at. You know, and when I learned about Michael's story, it kind of empowered me, because I still, even when I quit, I didn't know anybody that didn't drink or do drugs. And then when I did, and I started making these healthy choices for myself, and that's when I started to realize that there are people like that out there, and they're positive people, and they're doing well for themselves. And you know, there's no mystery that it has something to do with them being clean and healthy and living in a good way. So that's why I do it.
That's fantastic. As we look at some of the other issues, obviously, that Indigenous athletes face in Saskatchewan, one of the big ones is obviously racism. It's a fact of life, unfortunately, here in Saskatchewan, and something that I know you've both had to deal with. Michael, if you don't mind, we'll talk a little bit about your program that you helped launch as partially a response to that, I guess, called Boys with Braids. Do you mind explaining a little bit about that?
Yep. So when I was younger, always having long hair, in my household growing up, culture and spirituality was a key component of our lives. So understanding where I come from as a young Indigenous boy was something that gave me something to be proud of. And so when I would go out into everyday life, mainstream society, I would start getting teased and bullied for having long hair and just wanting to be proud of who I was and proud of my culture. So to have my hair being pulled and to be called a girl was something that really struck a chord, like really deep inside of me, and it hurt quite a bit. And so I remember coming home and sharing with my mom that I wanted to cut my hair, and not because I didn't like my hair, but because I didn't like the teasing and the bullying. So for me to make that decision, or to want to think that I wanted my hair cut because of the teasing and bullying, my mom told me, she said, don't cut your hair. She said, when you get older, you'll thank me for it. She said, just please don't cut your hair. And so I agreed. And so I went through my entire life, even to this day, still go through those things, but I'm a lot different now than when I was as a child. But me starting my own family and having my own kids, and two of my boys, they have their hair long as well. And so they came home from school, and they were telling me the same thing, sure, that they were being teased and that they were being bullied. And it really hit me deep, because after all of these years, that the same things were still happening, that happened to me, and now they're happening to my kids. And being a parent, you always want to protect and provide for your children. So with the explosion of social media and seeing that a lot of other peoples from across North America were going through the same struggle that not only I went through, but that my boys were going through, and realizing that there was no platform to give these young men a voice, or to even create awareness about the situation, or any education to the general public about the significance of why we as Indigenous men have long hair. So I launched the campaign called Boys with Braids, and it was an event, a gathering to help encourage young men to continue to grow their hair. Every day it's a struggle for them. I believe that when you're young and growing up, there comes a day that you face where you want to cut it. And again, not because you don't like your hair or you're not proud of your culture, but because of how relentless the bullying and teasing is. So the other thing was to create awareness that it is actually an issue, that young men are still going through this. And there's a lot of stories still that I see on social media where young men are cutting their hair because of the teasing and the bullying. And then the third kind of component of that was to really educate the general public about our traditions and our teachings and the significance of why we have long hair. So that was created. And throughout my basketball career, even playing at the university level in some, I'll call them hostile environments where we played in other gyms, even hearing some slurs coming from the crowd about my hair, was something that as I got older didn't affect me as much. But even, throughout my entire playing career, it's been something. On the world tour, it hasn't been an issue. So things have been really well in that capacity. So.
That's great. I mean, it's one thing. Racism in any form is clearly unacceptable. But it is sort of seems to be one thing when you hear it from the stands. I know, Craig, you've actually had to deal with it from your teammates on occasion. The guys who are supposed to be your brothers there in the locker room. I mean, this is just remarkable that this sort of thing still exists on occasion.
It is. It's growing up, I was always told that you're going to face this, you're going to face that, this is what's going to happen, this is the way the world is. My dad had gone through it, and he always tried to prepare me for what was to come, and he never prepared me for that. I didn't expect that a lot of the racism I was going to face was going to come from my own teammates, from within my own dressing room, and it was hard. To have your teammates talking about other First Nations people, calling them dirty Nietzsches or savages, but them think it's okay because they're not saying it to you. They're not referring to you, they're talking about everybody else. Well, those are still my people, they're exactly like me, how am I different? And when I was, one of the first times I experienced it, I didn't know how to handle it. I didn't know, I wanted to belong to that team. I wanted to be a part of that team. And I didn't know how to stand up against it. And so I just internalized it. And that was during one of the hardest points in my life where I was still drinking. And to deal with all of it, to just let it all go, I thought drinking was the answer, and I would just drink more. And so it made it a really hard 2 years. And then, I played with Beardies, and, we're 80% First Nation, so we didn't experience any of that. And I had a really fun year, and it was a great time. And then I went to Edmonton thinking, okay, it's over, it's done. I'm not gonna experience it anymore. Like, these people are older, they're more respectful. And my first year there, I had the captain of that team. I had an incident with him that it still it was totally unexpected. We were in the dressing room, I was just gonna tape my stick, and there was tape sitting in the next stall next to me, so I grabbed it, went to tape my stick, and he tells me to get my hands off that, you dirty Indian. And I was blown away that it was going to happen at this level too. And and I was older now, and after experiencing what a good team should be like, or what good teammates should be like, and being a little more educated on my culture and how to stand up against it, I reached out to another player on the team, and someone that I considered a close friend, and then we had it dealt with. But it's crazy, and
it's unbelievable.
It still happens to this day. Like Mike said about the hair. I started growing my hair after Mike's story. He's a role model of mine.
Absolutely.
So I haven't cut my hair in 5 years now, and I don't plan on cutting it.
That's great.
So it's kind of but even playing senior still in small town Saskatchewan, I experience slurs coming from the stands and from other players. I've had my hair pulled a couple times too on the ice. It still happens, and it's alive and well. And that's why I think Mike's initiative is really important and
for sure
and huge. So
we're getting a little bit short on time, and I'm sorry to cut you off at all there, Craig, but I do want to hopefully try and end on a little bit of a positive note. So I will just throw it out to either of you as we near the end of the show. If you had the magic wand, or even because there isn't a magic wand, what would you like to see happen? What do we need to do to to remove some of these barriers that Indigenous athletes face as they hopefully make that transition to more of an elite level sport?
I think, in removing some of those barriers where we kind of mentioned earlier that as you get into a higher level, that there is some support, because a lot of our people do live below the poverty line. So that is one of the barriers. But also too, for, a lot of the non-Indigenous population to just keep an open mind and, to do their best to be understanding of some of the situations that some of these youth are coming from. Craig alluded to, being a part of a team that was 80% Indigenous, you feel a lot more welcomed. And if our athletes are being more welcomed to some of these teams where they may be the only person of an Indigenous descent, to feel a little more welcome. So any of those teams or organizations or management, to be able to be a little more welcoming, like an extra mile, that will really help a lot of these families, because even like Craig shared, when he was younger, it was difficult to be away from his family. So
For sure.
To have that welcoming piece would be huge for us.
Absolutely. Guys, a half hour has gone by far too quickly, but it's been great to have you here. Thank you so much for not only coming here, but being so open and honest and sharing some of the experiences. And hopefully we're paving a way towards a brighter future for Indigenous athletes. Thanks so much, guys.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you.
Big thank you once again to Kevin Mitchell, Craig McCallum, and Michael Linklater. That will do it for this episode of Upfront on Shaw TV in partnership with the Saskatoon StarPhoenix. I'm Simon Hyatt. Thanks for watching.